In this video, we're going to talk about what God established to be murder or a murderer, how he defined that, and we're going to talk about the implications today. Exodus 20:13, thou shalt not kill. Numbers 35:12, they will be places of refuge from the avenger, so that anyone accused of murder may not die before they stand trial before the assembly. Okay, there were places to keep the accused safe while they were still considered innocent. They hadn't been proven guilty. So there was a place where they were kept safe. So similar to our justice system today, God established that the accused who had not been proven guilty were to be kept safe until that happened, until they were given a fair trial. Verse 14, give 3 on the side. 13. These 6 towns you will give will be your cities of refuge. Give 3 on this side of the Jordan and 3 in Canaan as cities of refuge. These towns will be a place of refuge for Israelites and foreigners residing among them, so that anyone who has killed another accidentally can flee there. If anyone strikes someone a fatal blow with an iron object, the person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. So he's defining what a murderer is. Or if anyone is holding a stone and strikes someone a fatal blow with it, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. Or if anyone is holding a wooden object and strikes someone with a fatal blow with it, that person is a murderer. The murderer is to be put to death. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death. When the avenger comes upon the murderer, the avenger shall put the murderer to death. If anyone with malice aforethought shoves another or throws something at them intentionally so that they die, or out of enmity, one person hits another with their fist so that the other dies, that person is to be put to death. That person is a murderer. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when they meet. Do you see the difference? So one is a murderer. Both are killing. One is a murderer. The other is the avenger of blood. Both have killed, but not both are murderers. You have to understand the difference. We have something similar, not that I want to compare God's law to what, this abomination that we have going on in the world that we call a justice system, which is completely corrupt. But there is a similar principle that you guys would understand. Like you wouldn't say, you don't say that if someone, for example, if there's a consequence for someone like the death penalty, you're not really calling like the people who did that, who were involved in performing this death penalty, you don't call them a murderer. They're an avenger of blood. So in verse 19, it says, the avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death. Both are killing. One's an avenger of blood, the other is a murderer. When the avenger comes upon the murderer, the avenger shall put the murderer to death. If anyone with malice aforethought shoves another or throws something at them intentionally so that they die, or if out of enmity one person hits another with their fist so that the other dies, that person is to be put to death. That person is a murderer. He's defining it. The avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death when they meet. But if without enmity someone just suddenly pushes another or throws something at them unintentionally, or without seeing them drops on them a stone heavy enough to kill them, and they die, then since that other person was not an enemy and no harm was intended, the assembly must judge between the accused and the avenger of blood according to these regulations. The assembly must protect the one accused of murder from the avenger of blood and send the accused back to the city of refuge to which they fled. The accused must stay there until the death of the high priest, who was anointed with the holy oil. But if the accuser goes outside the limits of the city of refuge to which they fled, and the avenger of blood finds them outside the city, the avenger of blood may kill the accused without being guilty of murder. Do you see that? Without being guilty of murder. The accused must stay in the city of refuge until the death of the high priest. Only after the death of the high priest may they return to their own property. This is to have the force of law for you throughout the generations to come wherever you live. That's kind of an interesting thing, and a little bit like seems a little bit random. If we had a law like that, we'd be like, that's totally random. Like, what does another person's death have anything to do with whether or not someone can return to their property? Well, our high priest, when he died, we were reconciled. He's reconciled to us, so that's the symbolism that's being represented here. Verse 30, anyone who kills a person is to be put to death as a murderer only on the testimony of witnesses, but no one is to be put to death on the testimony of only one witness. Okay, witness is plural, so it has to be 2 or more witnesses. Do not accept a ransom for the life of a murderer, of a murderer who deserves to die. They are to be put to death. Do not accept a ransom for anyone who has fled to a city of refuge, and so allow them to go back and live on their own land before the death of the high priest. Do not pollute the land where you are. Bloodshed pollutes the land, and atonement cannot be made for the land on which blood has been shed, except by the blood of the one who shed it. Do not defile the land where you live and where I dwell, for I, the Lord, dwell among the Israelites. Okay, so my daughter actually sent me this question on her way over here, driving over here, because she didn't want to forget that this question keeps coming up in her heart. Like, why is it that, God would say, do not kill, do not murder, but then he would allow the Israelites, like, for example, to go in and possess the land or to go to war. And in those situations, there was death, there was killing. Well, if God has told you to do that, then God is executing a certain judgment. He's not going to do that to the righteous, so he's doing it to the wicked, and he is causing his people to possess the land. Now, we don't necessarily do that right now. God isn't telling us, go in there and possess the land, because the truth is that we have been scattered. We're in exile right now, and he is going to gather the nations when he comes back. He's going to gather the nations, and he's doing it right now. He's been pulling us out of the nations and bringing us to Israel. Then he's going to gather us to himself. We're going to go and meet him in the sky, those of us who are his. The wicked will endure their judgment here on earth, and it won't be until Babylon falls that then God's people will come back with him. The armies of heaven will follow him when he comes back. He will throw the beast into the lake of burning sulfur, the false prophet into the lake of burning sulfur. Satan will be bound for 1,000 years, and he will slay everyone else by the double-edged sword coming out of his mouth. His people will possess the land. In Daniel 2, it says that this is not going to happen until that rock that is cut out, not by human hands, is thrown to the feet. That fifth kingdom of papal Rome and the 10 toes coming out of her. So her kingdom of false religion, Babylon the Great, and the prostitutes that bore out of her through the Protestant Reformation, all of this false religion that's been established. They follow man, they follow Christmas, none of his holy days, Easter. They, set up images of the cross, images of nativity scenes, worship on counterfeit Sunday Sabbath. They continue in tithing, even though, that was fulfilled through sacrifice. It was part of sacrifice. And they worship pastors and man's doctrines. They continue in the prostitutions of their harlot mother, the Catholic Church. That kingdom, that fifth kingdom, the feet in that statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream, papal Rome and the prostitutes that bore out of her, that stone that is cut out, not by human hands, in Daniel 2, is going to be thrown to those feet. And all of the kingdoms are going to come down all the way back to Babylon. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome, and the prostitutes that bore out of her. All of them are going to be thrown down. And then that rock is going to inhabit the entire earth. Well, we know that actually does not happen. Babylon does not fall until after the resurrection and after the bowls of wrath have been poured out. So God's people don't inhabit the earth or the land until all of that happens. And if you'd like to read about that, you can read about it in Revelation 19. This is when God returns with his holy ones, and they inhabit the earth, and they reign with him for 1,000 years. So the other question that my daughter was asking, well, what if Jews try to justify what they're doing right now? What if they're trying, what would you say to them? And I said I wouldn't say anything because they don't believe in the same word that I believe in. How am I going to have a conversation with people who justify themselves through rabbinical commentaries and lies? How am I going to have a conversation with them when that's what they choose to justify themselves with? We are not speaking on the same authority. I believe in the Bible, and I believe in it with all of my heart, and I believe in the whole Bible. I believe in the New Testament and the Old Testament. I know that it is true, and I know that what's going on right now. So if I were to speak with another Christian and they claim to believe in the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, then I would be able to show them, just as I'm showing you, look, we don't inhabit the land until then. Israel, not all who are Israel are descended from Israel. Not all who are Abraham's children are descended from Abraham. And so we're talking about a spiritual Israel, but that's not what Jews are claiming. They're claiming that just because of ethnicity, just because of bloodline they are descended. And that's not true. It's false. Nor is Zionism, that is claiming that what they're doing right now is biblical and that they can do this and this is okay for them to do. They are not true Jews. These are irreligious people who don't even believe in the Bible or the Torah that they're citing. But I think that the worst thing are the counterfeit Christians who are supporting them, who blindly support because they don't know the word. But they actually have the New Testament, so they should know better. They should know that this is not biblical, what they're doing, that this is not condoned by God. We're all in exile right now. We are all scattered among the nations, and he's going to draw us back in, and that's what he's doing right now. He's pulling us out of the nations. He's bringing us together. We are the land, and then we will inhabit the land, the earth, after Babylon falls. So not even after the resurrection. I mean, it takes place after the resurrection, but not immediately after the resurrection. After the resurrection, we will go up. Then the bowls of wrath will be poured out on those who remain. Then Babylon will fall. Then Christ and his holy ones will return to the earth. Now, when God was telling people to go in and possess the land in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, when he was telling his people, go in and possess the land, people could not just go in and willy-nilly decide what they're doing today. Oh, I'm going to murder all these people. They couldn't do that. And what they were doing was not, God didn't say go in and murder everybody. He didn't say that because that would be against his law, right? Murder has to do with shedding innocent blood. And when I say innocent blood, I mean that person has not gone through a process in God's legal system of two or more witnesses testifying that this person has done something that is worthy of the penalty of death. So there's no avenger of blood there. An example of this would be when Cain killed Abel. Cain murdered Abel. This is not something that Cain was told to do by God. But in the other situations when God said you are to go in there and possess the land, God had already judged that situation. He was telling his people, you are to go in there and do this, fulfill what I'm telling you to do. I have already made this judgment. That's not what's happening right now, guys. First of all, Zionists are claiming that that is their land and that they get to go in and possess it. And that's a lie because you know the timeline, you know the timing of when that happens. These people are distorting the word of God. They're misusing it. They're committing blasphemy. And unstable false Christians are supporting it. So to answer that question, I would not sit and have a conversation with a Jew unless we could agree that the Bible is the word of God. And I don't think that they would do that because they have all of these other, these other supporting documents, the Talmud and, all of this rabbinical commentary. We would have to admit that the Bible is the sole word of God. And I would even be willing to have a conversation with someone and talk about, okay, let's just look at the Old Testament then. Let's just look at what the Old Testament says. I would be willing to just look at that because I know that this would make it clear. So did God tell you to go do this? The Old Testament talks about exile. The Old Testament talks about not inhabiting the earth until that kingdom is brought down. The Old Testament talks about the criteria for murder. So I actually believe that the Old Testament has enough information to prove that what these people are what they're doing is wrong. I mean, in fact, I've already told you that. But the New Testament gives you the entire picture in combination with the Old Testament. So there's my answer to that. Thank you for listening. Please discern with God.